Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us today. On behalf of the committee and YAFE, I welcome you to this event, to this second season of what we call Feminist 101. And in Spanish, we can translate it into Economía Feminista Cara a Cara. Then I will leave this to the interpreters. Thank you very much for being here today with us. As we said, you can choose the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. And before we begin with the interview, I will give you some housekeeping information. We are in Zoom, so please mute your mics during the interview. And the event will last about 1 hour and will be recorded and posted on YouTube. For the next 30 minutes, I will interview Valeria, and our objective is to provide an interactive dialogue with her. We will ask her some questions, and we will open this session for a Q&A so that you can write your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. You can ask the questions in Spanish if you feel more comfortable with it. And then Gianni, our colleague, will moderate those questions into English. Now, without further ado, welcome everyone. My name is Noelia Méndez Santolaria. I'm a feminist economist. I live in Argentina, and since I have been working on this, I have read a lot, and I met Valeria Esquivel. Welcome. Thank you, Noe, for the invitation. With Valeria, we will speak for some time. We will speak about feminist economics and care economy, topics in which she works. And she doesn't need further presentation, but I will do it. She works at the International Labor Office in Geneva as a specialist in gender and employment policy. She studied at Buenos Aires University and the University of London, and developed her academic and professional career as a feminist economist. In 2012, she edited the collective work La Economía Feminista in Latin America, a roadmap on the database in the region. She also co-edited 3 issues of the journal Gender and Development, dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals and to the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action and the post-COVID-19 recovery with a gender perspective, published in 2022. She specializes in care issues, both from a research point of view, including the measure of unpaid care work, and in the design of care policies. She's a co-author of the report Care Work and Care Workers for a Decent Work Future by the ILO 2018, and Innovations in Care, New Concepts, New Actors, New Policies. Her recent work focuses on issues such as microeconomic, employment, and she continues studying the impact of COVID-19 in general with the aim of generating gender-sensitive emergency and recovery policies. She's an associate director of Feminist Economics and elected member of the board of YAFE, International Association for Feminist Economics. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Noe. It's a pleasure for me to be here joining you today. Well, my task was a little difficult because you have an extensive work, and to summarize this in 30 minutes is very difficult. So I selected 3 topics based on the pieces of your work and things that I read every day about you and trigger these questions. First of all, I want to ask you about Latin American feminist economics? What are its main contributions and where are we going? And for that, I bring the book I mentioned before, the Economía Feminista from Latin America, that you edited in 2012, with works of several Latin American authors and where they cover various topics that made the debate that we were taking place in the region around labor, trade, crisis. It's a book that I read when I studied economics and gender at the Buenos Aires University, but it's a recurrent reference for me. How was the process of editing that work? What do you think are the main contributions the feminist economics makes from these issues? And in what ways do you think that those debates that took place at the time, more than 10 years ago, are still valid today? Well, thank you very much, Noe, for your invitation. Thank you, colleagues and friends, for being here today. The book that I grabbed, it's here with me now. It was on my bookshelf, and of course it is available. It was edited by UN Women. When it was during the first year or second of ONU UN Women, and it's a result of some work of GEMLAC, that is a group of feminist economists from Latin America that was born from an international group that had been working since 1995, and then in 2000 published in World Development, developed by Diane Elson, Konopoulos, and some of us were taking their courses at the University of Utah, and then being professors. And so we were on our journey. The courses took place in 2005 and 6, and in 2010, in 27, sorry, or 8, we ourselves coordinated a course in Mexico, and then we did it in Buenos Aires. We gave the course in Buenos Aires with the conference of YAFE in Buenos Aires. So we felt after all that work that we had a journey to write about it. And we also wanted to publish something that would be useful for us to give a framework to this training and to use it also later in courses at an undergraduate and postgraduate level. So in that sense, this book gathers all the information we had up to that point: poverty, care, topics that were very relevant at that point in history. We were ending a crisis, the 2008 crisis, not the ones later. We were analyzing how the economies were not recovering successfully. Women continue being back after the employment recovery, with the 90s very close. And I also remember some debates where our friend Lucia Perez Fragoso says, you have passed the 90s, but in Mexico, we are still in this journey.
And the challenge was to give that some coherence. So in the introduction, I was very cautious as to say that it wasn't that it was everyone who studied feminist economics, nor that all the themes were covered. It was just our contribution. But looking at it comprehensively, the topics that we chose: poverty, labor market, care, trade, more structural issues such as where, in which sectors women were working, what were the work dynamics and work participation of women, Those are the key and cross-cutting issues. So for your question, Noelia, as regards what's the difference or that new contribution from us feminist economists, I think our new contribution is a strong emphasis on inequalities, intersectionalities, and we didn't used to use that vocabulary, but that was what we thought. We didn't used to think of women as a comprehensive group, homogeneous group. I remember that I wrote to Nancy Folbrick while I was doing my thesis, and I was saying, but what you're saying about the USA, it seems to refer to a homogeneous group of middle class women. Where the problems of the middle class is very significant, and it wasn't the case for our economies. Depending on where women were placed in class, their problems, their issues were very different. And I think that that's one of the emphasis of the book, and also a strong structural analysis. Structuralism in Latin America is very significant. We were trying to reinterpret, on the one hand, what we were learning about feminist economics from the northern countries, and also trying to contribute our heterodox, our education, trying to find a feminist vision within that perspective. And we have some publications from ECLAC, not from the gender division, but other publications from ECLAC that talk about feminist economics and women contributing to that sector. I don't know how long my answer was, but I believe that I'm on time. Yes, it's perfect. You're right on time. No worries. We were caring for the time because there's so many things to talk about. So, but I'm going to go on to the next question, because we're also going to talk about lack of time or time poverty, because another recurring reference is for me that I always watch is your TED Talk from 2015 about time poverty, where you mentioned a hidden dimension of poverty. And I know that you did great work to make it visible, to take it out of hiding. And we're talking about time poverty or lack of time. It was very present. It was a very present factor during the pandemic. We started looking at time as something that is scarce and tangible. But I wanted to basically talk with you about this. What do you think of when you speak of time poverty or lack of time? How did you develop that concept, especially after the pandemic? And if there are those differences between what you mentioned between the North and the South. So first of all, that notion of poverty of time or time poverty is a concept that was proposed by the Livy Institute, Ahid Shakarias and Antonopoulos. And it's applicable specifically to the Latin American context. So I came from doing a survey on time use in Buenos Aires. I was working on a concept which is, if we have unpaid care and the we were discussing GDP and care work, uh, then I was thinking about time and GDP, and that was part of my thesis. And the comment is that since unpaid care work, which is so high in so many social classes, it it's an equalizer and not an unequalizer. The access to care services is what is unequal. But in the Gini, I could say that access to services or lack of access to care work does copy the Gini. So at that moment, what was said is that we had to compare the use of time. So the use of time in lower income houses in comparison to those who don't live in low income households. And so time poverty and the difference, what we had to do was to recalculate poverty. That is to say, we had to rethink poverty so that in order to adjust it if there was time poverty. And how did we adjust this? The idea is that poverty in income, as understood in Latin America, which is, I believe that you all know, but you basically calculate the amount of the basket of common goods, utilities, and then you establish a boundary or a line, and there is a requirement. There is a minimum significant amount that if you have access to that amount, then you are not low income. And if you don't make less than that, then you are low income. Now, whether you're spending your money on goods, services, and utilities is irrelevant. What is said is that the household has the necessary income to access those basic commodities. So I guess this has to do with relative or absolute poverty. Here we're talking about absolute poverty. And of course, then we do have the aspect of inflation. Inflation obviously impoverishes the population because that means that the cost of goods, services, utilities are going to rise faster than the average income of the citizen. So on the basis of this common goods is that there is someone in the household who purchases in the supermarket and cooks and makes a meal. Someone who transforms access to public education to children who go and come back from school. They transform what you acquire into something that you consume. And uh, that could also happen overseas, so to speak. I mean, for example, low income households cannot take a taxi or cannot go out to dinner. That is to say, there's something that is undergoing that process. Somebody is doing unpaid care work. The issue is what happens when the household does not have the time to provide those services. They don't have time because men and women in that household, they don't have time because they're working long hours to generate an income in order to access those basic goods and services. So what happens is that the adults in that household become people who are poor as regards time. They have time poverty because they don't have the time to access those products and turn it into goods and services. And they don't also have the money because if they had the money, they would be able to access those services by paying for that service. So what you need to do is to adjust for that lack of time because you are providing paid work. And so we need to compare with those other households where they do have the time or the income to access those goods and services. So to this extent, what we can see is that poverty is greater, levels of poverty are greater when there are situations of working poor, when there are long working paid hours. For example, self-employed workers that work extra time, and more hours to compensate for the low income, but then they don't have the time to access goods and services. Certain households led by women and who cannot access to the care work required or can't access the infrastructure required. And something else that's very interesting is that we can look inside the household, specifically into men and women. A woman is poor because she is time poor, not because she lives in a household that is poor as regards time. Women are poor because they live in low income households. We don't know anything about the individuals living there. So for me, it's a very significant measurement. But the problem is that since it always triggers more poverty than what we measure, it's not very popular. Not many people like it among the governing authorities because you are constantly visibilizing a problem that wasn't visible before. It existed, but it wasn't visible. So I think that this is one of the possible measures that we can explore. And I know that some governments have undertaken the measurement, such as the government of Colombia, for example. So I believe that what's truly important, and Noelia here, is that I think that the time use surveys do not need to just talk about the additional measuring. It's so difficult to conduct a survey on the use of time that we need to apply it to see where we have lack of infrastructure, lack of care work, where we have the households that need a bigger or a greater income, or their problems of work and unpaid or paid work, or where women cannot access the market, or their possibilities are not so good. So the possibility of doing a finer analysis on households using these time use surveys, I think that this could be a I think that it could contribute to future public policies. I completely agree, Vale. And I know that today it's not very popular when you talk about the numbers of in poverty, but it's true that we can no longer deny this. We can't play dumb and look elsewhere. I mean, during the pandemic, we know what stress due to time sensitive issues was a variable, and it's something that is very important today, and it gives us greater visibility as regard to differences of the use of time. Exactly, Noelia. Even within this framework, you could say that the pandemic is the situation. The pandemic was full poverty of time without any substitutes. There were no possible substitutes for anyone, not just for women, for everyone. And so you don't have any other possibilities than providing that unpaid work uh, at the expense of other things, of physical costs. I mean, like sleeping less hours so you can work more hours. Exactly. And the last question I wanted to ask you is very closely related to these substitutes, to unpaid work, and how that is transferred to the paid sector, and how can we start addressing in your work the economy of care and the concepts that you develop to visualize this as an economic sector in macro development and in public policies for or international organizations such as the ILO. So maybe if you could define when we talk about care economy, what type of work that implies, the characteristics, the employment that it generates, so that we have an idea of what we're talking about, because it's not simple or obvious.
I wanted to mention before, and I mentioned Rian, because the other support to feminist economies in Latin America is how we advanced in the care agenda, because that is one of the topics, I think. But to begin to define the care economy, this comprises paid care and unpaid care. So this implies or covers all household chores and work that is provided by caregivers, and also all the care works in education sectors, the health sectors, and household. So this definition that is given by ILO shows a lot the south of the globe. 15 years ago, we debated with colleagues from the north if caregivers are people who provide cares, and we insist that without this care paid work, without the work they give to some other households, I don't remember how it is called in Argentina, domestic workers, you mean? Yes. So without that work, the organization of a house wouldn't exist. So this definition is very interesting, and it belongs to the South, let's say. And then when we think about the health sector and the education sector, we separate from the idea of only paying attention to long-term care in the elderly or to care provided in a kindergarten, because that focus is for the North, so the rest of the systems, the education system and the health system, are covered. But that is not the case in our system. I mean, that would be something for the North countries. And the pandemic showed strongly the value of the health sector as a comprehensive sector, and not only for some, for example, for the care of the elderly. So this bias is important, because the sectors that are typically, I mean, if they are absent, these sectors demand the work of women, and they separate them from the paid work tasks. And also the care economy implies thinking about workers in these sectors and the differences, of course, because they exist, but also what they have in common: the public provision of health and education, which implies that unions, for example, come to agreements with the private sector. Also, for example, when there is private health system, the costs are more expensive, and there is inequality the income received within each sector. When there is more organized collective bargaining, the salaries or wages are less, they are more similar, and also the paid care of the paid work of domestic workers, let's say, of women who work in households, these jobs is absolutely unequal. There are more when there are houses that have more women working, the Gini is bigger. This happens in Latin America, in Africa, and in countries in the South. So the umbrella term for care economy allows us to think not only in unpaid care activities, but also in the differences between women who provide those services and, on the other hand, women who need to or want to work for, and women who cannot work. There is some, that's a question of women, let's say, a tension between women, and we think in a more comprehensive way, as we did in the ILO report. And I think we have to think about care activities and the investment in these activities as a possibility of doing this demand more dynamic, as a well use of resources to create decent work, to increase productivity, and to make the economy work. I mean, if education and health don't work, we know the economy doesn't work. So from that point of view, we don't have like a point of view from the offer, but also from the demand part. We see that we are where we are in the debate. And I think it's very important to think that the engagement that the Buenos Aires signed an agreement at the end of last year, and the improvement in the care agenda in Latin America is something that the economy, the feminist economy in America Latina has been contributed by, has contributed to the numbers, to the budgets, to the cost, to the design of policies, to the view we have over poverty, inequality, to see that the investments that we are doing on care activities and the resources that we are providing for that are not just a desire or wishful thinking. It's something that has been done, and where the feminist economy could, in Latin America, add to the feminist movement in the region to have these improvements and results and this agenda that is ours and that we have transformed for it to exist in this way. It's not the same agenda that was originated in the central countries long ago. Sorry, I just wanted to ask you, as you said, from ILO, you are conducting or developing different tools to make visible care activities, unpaid care activities, for example. I was lucky enough to work as part of the joint program to promote decent work for women that you developed. And I would like to know from your experience, you have been mentioning these tensions about the North and the South that exist in these international organizations. But what are the challenges that the feminist agenda has to face to launch to make visible these problematics that we have, and to make them visible in the international agenda or international organizations? Well, there are different international organizations. In particular, the ILO is has this topic in the agenda. I mean, the care economy is part of the agenda since 2019, and it's part of their planning, it's part of their objectives. I mean, there is no tension in that sense, fortunately, let's say. On the contrary, but it is sometimes difficult when we speak about resources. Not when we, let's say, of course, we need to have a political will, but even when this exists, this is a topic that has to do with the economic sphere, because of course there are other areas of expertise that share and different industries that analyze this. But I think that to make some improvement, we have to think about, in a crisis as we are facing, how can we develop resources for these policies to advance, to improve, when they are expensive or they create costs? To advance, to have care work, decent work, we need, there are costs. Technology can help, of course, but this won't replace, I mean, we won't have robots in hospitals. That's not the case, and not even in schools. So how can we develop resources in our complicated economies, and how can we do this to be useful in the present but also in the future? And how can this contribute to have better jobs, not only in the care economy, but in the economy in general? I mean, I think this is an important topic. The answer always is there are no resources. That's the answer we receive. So to debate about policies, about macroeconomic policies, to debate about expenses, costs, well, these are economic topics, and I think as feminist economists, we have to continue debating about this. I have a lot of questions to make, but since we don't have so much time, let's move on to the role change. This event proposes you to become the interviewer so that you can make some questions to us as feminist economists. I will answer them as a representative today, but I would like to open the debate for those in the audience. If you want to participate, if you want to answer any question that Valeria may ask, you can, and we can start this interactive part of the event because we have 15 minutes left. So, Valeria, we give you the floor. So I will ask Noe and the feminist economists that are here. I would like to ask you, what do you think that the new generations of feminist economists bring to the debate? And what are the challenges, the concerns they have, and how are they different from the older generations? I have been thinking a lot about this because I don't feel there is a gap, but I think that I have a different point of view in the sense that there is some journey, there is a path of producing evidence, of previous studies made. I mean, there is some journey in the last years by the feminist economists. I mean, there is a lot of work done. So as the new generation, I think the question that we ask ourselves all the time and we can find an answer is that how can we do this differently? How can we transform our reality, our uh, inequality, the inequality that we see, the unfair things that we see, how can we transform them? I feel I am in a time where I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn from the evidence that we already have. But how can we do it differently? How can we transform what we have today? How can we I don't have any answer, but I feel that I am there. I am on a different place, at least in Latin America with the feminist movement. There are a lot of things that we understand are okay. Um, at least in this at these times, but we still have the question open. How can we continue with this? I don't know if anybody else wants to give some opinion.
I was thinking of asking you maybe a second question and then opening up the floor. Because my second question was about IAFI. Because for me, IAFI was a very special place. Uh, a place that allowed me to meet and interact with feminist economics who guided me in my work, ask them questions, gave me the opportunity to then do joint publications saying, okay, we from the global south have these visions. So my question is, how do you and others, how do you feel IAFI? Do you feel that it's close to you, that it's a stranger organization? How could we make it, if you feel that it's not addressing your needs, how could we make it more open, more warm? Well, my experience in IAFI, I was able to participate in a virtual conference during the pandemic. If not, I wouldn't have been able to become acquainted with IAFI. And I felt IAFI as my intellectual home right from the start. It's very difficult to find these spaces for feminist economists. And I believe that that specific event was very useful because it was in English and Spanish, and the that journal in IAFI has always been a reference. It's been in my mandatory reading, and becoming involved at that moment because I was able to access a 1 year free membership, and I was able to start participating in the different committees, and it was a group of people that uh, welcomed me with open arms right from the start. They were saying, "Oh, you're here, we need you." But it also did have its challenges. I remember that the first committee meetings that were all held in English, I remember saying, what did I get into? You know, but luckily they had all the initiatives of inclusion. I had colleagues that spoke in Spanish that I could work with. So I guess one of the obstacles, one of the barriers is the language barriers, but I do think that we are at a turning point, and we are trying to change this. It totally opened up my mind. I read the journal, but this part of meeting other feminists economists allowed me to start putting all my knowledge into practice, how we work on feminist economics. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, Noelia. So I think that events like these are very important, that we have these events and we have a translation for these events, especially for these events and membership committees. So now I'm going to give you back the ball, and we're going to go for some questions from the audience. So, Mariana, I see you have your hand raised. You have the floor. Excellent. Thank you very much. It was an excellent conference. First of all, I wanted to talk about the question asked by Valeria, and it had to do with theory. But then I was thinking, today I'm at the conference and I participated in the conference of IAFI in 2019, and I think that changed many things for me. I changed my tutor, which completely was a complete turning point in feminist economics for me. I did my research instance with IAFI, and at that moment, my English wasn't very good, but even so, I felt welcomed by the environment when I had to give my conference on uh, gender budget for my PhD, and I was very nervous because my English wasn't very well. But I remember that Sholanda, from a feminist perspective, told me that nobody would judge my English because that was not feminist. And I remember that I felt cared for and I felt supported by a panel that was very welcoming. So for me, IAFI completely changed me, my vision, my contacts, and I would like to have more contact with IAFI because I've been back at Uruguay for 1 year now, but I'm not having the contact with IAFI that I would still like to have because it's very enriching from a professional level. And also just thank IAFI was very significant for me, and the people that make up IAFI are also very important. As regards the new challenges, what happened with me is that there is a variable, a variant that doesn't have to do with the new generation. I don't represent the new generation, but the new variant, I'm very worried, has me very worried on climatic change. I think that we need to take this into account when we're talking about time use as well, because women in Latin America are having more and more constraints and limitations on access to drinking water. And this is creating strong repercussions for women and for Latin America on a global level because it's affecting production. And I think that we're in a critical moment here in Uruguay. We're having drinking water scarcity. There are people who cannot access to drinking water, and everything that has to do with access to water is requiring more time that we hadn't initially thought of. So, resuming the variable that has to do with climatic change, this is a new issue for health and education related to water and the use of time, and it's a major challenge. It's here, it's come, it's here to stay, and I don't think that we have the necessary tools to address this issue. I think that we need to create an analysis group to give results from a feminist perspective, because sometimes we have more engineering visions and we can provide other solutions, but I think that it's essential that we start thinking of how we link the themes and how we start doing public policy proposals from a feminist perspective. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I was on mute. I don't know if maybe you want to ask. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. We have a few more minutes. So Margarita raised her hand. Margarita, I'm going to ask you to be very brief because we have to end on time. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Hi, Valeria, Noelia, everyone. How are you today? So I just wanted to leave one concerning issue for me. I'm not part of the young generation, so I'm not going to pretend to be a young generation, but I'm based in Brazil and we're generating a network here. And I believe that your work, I think that there's a language barrier, a big language barrier, and it makes it difficult to access to some content. And we also have some monetary issues, economic issues. Some people are not being able to participate in this IAFE conference because of economic issues. So I think that there are many visions, many issues on the global south that still need addressing, such as sustainability. We could talk about feminist macroeconomics in the global south. Sometimes we are too focused on care work, and I think that Brazil is just a country that is just starting out in this, and we have a lot to learn. So I guess my recommendation for the future is to have more IAFE in Latin America, in the global south, um, and that would be it. Thank you. Margarita, thank you. So I just wanted to tell everyone that it's possible to participate in the Cape Town conference. You are going to be able to participate in a hybrid model. It's going to be hybrid because you're going to see in Quito, we had different time frames for different regions around the world for the Quito conference. So the participants from Asia could participate in some sessions when Latin America was just waking up. So that is not going to happen in the Geneva Convention and in the Cape Town Convention because it's going in for the Cape Town Convention is going to be in Cape Town time. But you do have online registration, and that online registration is much cheaper than the in-person fee. And there are several sessions, not all of the session, but several sessions and several panels that are going to be translated into Spanish and into French. So if any of you are here and you want to register and you think that you can't even pay that online fee, then you can communicate, you can reach out to us because we can work on this. Uh, we are trying to address the fees so that the person who wants to access can have access. And we are also trying to address the language barrier above all. So if you want, you can participate. And of course, we can organize conferences in our part of the world. Okay, Vale, well, thank you very much. This would be the end because we are right on the dot. So if you have any final remarks, I just wanted to thank the the invitation and just wanted to say that for those of us who are in the mid generation, which means that we still have tutors and mentors, and we still have mentors and are mentored in our hearts, but we are in an intermediate generation. So we still have the presence of our mentors. We are mentored, but we are also mentoring. And so it's a great pleasure to have the young generations here. And it was a pleasure to hear from the young generations today, the questions from Noelia. So thank you so much for such a great event. Thanks so much. Thank you, Valeria, for your time and your openness and your warmth in answering the questions in this interactive space. So that would be the end for today. Thank you for the participation. And if you wish to see more similar content, then you can access the IAFI website and the YouTube channel and follow us on social media for events like this one and other events such as feminist economics and reproductive justice and many other IAFI content. Thank you so much for sharing the time with us, and we hope to meet you again soon. Have a great rest of the day.